Welcome to the King Institute for Faith and Culture. My name is Brandon Story. I teach in the English department, and in just a minute I'll be introducing Frank Morgan, who will introduce today's performer and composer. But I do want to tell you about two things coming up in the life of the King Institute over the next week. And one is an unusual time, so mark this. Friday morning at 9:15 in this very space, we'll have Malcolm Geit, who's come all the way from the UK. He is a retired chaplain from the University of Cambridge. He is a poet and a singer-songwriter and the most compelling speaker on Dante that I've ever heard, and I know you will enjoy his program. So Friday morning, 9:15 in this space. The night before, he'll be at Emmanuel Episcopal Church at 7 p.m. And then 1 week from today, 9:15, next Monday morning, Jeff Monroe, who you may recall did our opening convo via video last school year, but he's coming down from Michigan to talk about his book, Reading Buechner. You will recall that the King Institute for Faith and Culture began as the Buechner Institute, and so he will be the Buechner lecturer for this school year. 9:15 a week from today, and that evening at 7 p.m. at the Central Presbyterian Church. So please join us for those two events. They're going to be fantastic. But this is a program literally years in the making, and it's great to see a good crowd for it. And so I'm going to invite our esports coach and mathematician, Frank Morgan, up to introduce Dr. Linderman.
Hello, everyone. Excuse me, I'm very nervous. This isn't something I usually do. I put some thought into this. Dr. Linderman was a professor of mine, somebody I hold in very high esteem. So I thought it would be appropriate to talk for a moment about his impact on me as an individual, and then say a few things about him before he gets started. I love music a great deal. Since I was a kid, it's been a huge part of my life. My father was a guitarist. His father was a guitarist. I was okay at the guitar. And I really love classical music, which it wasn't normal where I came from. So it was difficult to find classical music to listen to. And this was in a time before the internet and when every song that has ever been recorded was available whenever you wanted it. So I would spend the weekends listening to AM and lower FM radio stations, hoping to find something, anything. I'm from a small town. I'm sure a lot of us are. And classical music, math, critical science are things that individuals are not extremely interested in thinking about. And that's fine, to each their own. But I was always interested. And when I got to King, I was completely unsure of what I wanted to study. But there were a few individuals that I was subjected to that pushed me in a direction that I really enjoyed. One of the major turning points for me as an individual was whenever I saw Dr. Linderman perform Frederick Chopin's Revolutionary Study. It was my favorite piece at the time, and if you've never heard it, I strongly recommend you go listen to it whenever you can. It's very emotional, it's got a lot of power, and I think that's one thing that classical music grants that maybe contemporary music does not. For somebody as talented and intelligent as this man to take the time to work with me, as an individual, my skills and my intelligence, it was life-changing. I had no idea he was that talented at the time. But it was truly a life-changing experience for me that day that I saw him play, because I knew that piece so well and it was so important to me personally. So I guess you could say Dr. Linderman put the humanity in math and physics and music that I'd never seen before. It let me know that I had the worth and that I had the ability to do these things because he had worked with me so much. When he could have very well done this, I may have done that rather than worked with myself, I don't know. Probably much more fulfilling. But I started studying music after I graduated school, and it's been a great experience for me, in addition to the mathematics that I still work on, some physics, but usually math. I struggle with math, so I like to do it more. So I wanted to say thank you, Dr. Linderman, for that experience and the work that you put into music and for providing this composition for us today. Dr. Linderman graduated from Erskine College in 1987 with a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics. He attained his master's in 1990 from the Virginia Polytechnic and State Institute, Virginia Polytechnic and State University, excuse me. In 1997, he got his Ph.D. from the University of Memphis. He's authored several mathematical papers. He has composed more than just this one original work in music. He has traveled to all 50 states and 40 countries. He has served as the athletics faculty representative for King since 2004, which encompassed the entire time that I was an athlete here, and he helped make the transition from NAIA to Division II, which was difficult. And I think most impressive, he still maintains a sport, provably that he could dominate me in completely, as he has completed 20 marathons since he's been faculty at King. So, without further delay, I'd like to present a personal hero of mine, Dr. William Linderman.
Well, thank you, Frank, for that very generous introduction and for sharing some of those memories. I'll be honest, I think the 9:15 convocation time is a tough audience because people attend for a variety of reasons. This morning, for some of you, I think it's probably not really about the music, but that you came just to support me, and I really appreciate that. For some of you, I think it is primarily the music. Maybe you weren't able to attend the program yesterday. And for some of you, and maybe even for many of you, you just need another chapel credit. And I understand that. Maybe you're thinking about an upcoming test, or what you did over the weekend, or wondering if North Carolina is going to beat Kansas tonight in the NCAA championship. But whatever brought you here today, I hope you will find something enjoyable or interesting about the program today. And there's one thing I think we can all agree on. Convocation starts at 9:15, and it needs to end by 10 o'clock at the very latest. So I don't have a printed program of what we're going to perform today. I know what I want to start with, but we'll wait and see how we're doing on time as we progress. There is a handout, however, on 3 poems by Richard Wilbur, and I wrote 3 songs based on these poems, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to read the poems before we perform the songs. I want to thank Carrie Lynn Paulson from the King Library for securing permission for me to print the poems. I put the geometric figures together on the front of the handout, and after you read the poems, I want you to think about if you can make sense of that. I want to especially thank the 2 performers who are helping me today, Bethany Dawson on the cello and mezzo-soprano Rachel Helton. They have been wonderful to work with, learning this music that I wrote. And I also want to thank Dr. Martin Dodderwijk and the King Institute for Faith and Culture for allowing a math professor to give a concert as part of the series for this year. The first piece that we're going to perform is a serenade for cello and piano. I originally wrote it as a piano solo, but it didn't seem to quite work that way, so I added a cello line to it later. So thank you all for coming this morning. I hope that you will enjoy the program. And here is a serenade for cello and piano. Thank you. So I have taken 2 sabbaticals during my time at King, and I want to thank the King administration for its ongoing support of a sabbatical program, because it was during those periods that I was able to work on some of the music that I'm presenting today and what I presented yesterday. About 15 years ago, I took a year-long sabbatical and was fortunate enough to get accepted as a visiting professor at Cornell for the year. I had an easy teaching load, and I was able to take a composition class in the School of Music both semesters, and I studied piano with a graduate student, and it was just an amazing year for lots of reasons. In the composition class in the spring, we looked at some 20th century compositional techniques, and we talked about how a piece of music needs to have some uniformity to it so that it holds together and makes sense, but it also needs to have some variety to give it interest. And it's the job of the composer to strike a balance between these 2 extremes. Before the 20th century, most pieces of music were written in either a major key or a minor key, and that was a way of giving it an inherent uniformity. But with atonal music in the 20th century, composers began to look for other ways to provide uniformity. And one technique that we looked at was the idea of sets in music. So to form a set, you can start with any note and represent it with the number 0. And then a half step above, the next note above would be 1. The note after that, 2, etc. And we looked at the set 0, 1, 4 and 0, 3, 4, which have the same intervals, the same distances. It's basically a major third and a minor third. The notes in the set can appear in any order or in any octave, and they can start at any place. And so I want to try to demonstrate this at the piano. So you can start with any note. This is a C, and let that represent 0. And then the next note above would be a 1. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 0, 1, 4, and 0, 3, 4. But you can mix up the order, or you can mix up the octaves. So we looked at examples of works that were written using sets in music as a unifying principle, and we were given an assignment to write a song based on a poem using the set 014 and 034. And so those opening measures that I just played a minute ago were the measures that I wrote when I had a chance to get to the piano as part of that assignment. But I didn't have a poem in mind of how I was going to use that. So I went to Barnes & Noble, and I found an anthology of American poetry, and I started looking through it just to try to get some ideas. And as soon as I saw the poem Mind by Richard Wilbur, I knew that that was what I wanted to work with, for several reasons. I thought the imagery of the bat in the poem fit the character of those opening measures that I had already written. I liked the fact that the poem wasn't too long. There were poems in the anthology that were pages and pages long, and I didn't want to write an opera. I just needed to write an art song. I liked the fact that the poem rhymed, and not that I think all poems need to rhyme, but the poet is trying to say something within the confines of that structure, that limitation, which is similar to the assignment that I had been given. And I also just really liked the poem. And as I've thought about the poem, what do I think the poem is about? Well, the mind at play is maybe like flying around in the dark, haplessly, no hard knocks. But the mind at work, if you're trying to understand a new concept, or wrestling with an idea, or struggling with a hard math problem, you are going to falter, and you do have to explore. You may make some errors. You may bump up against the cave. But after you've processed the new idea, which takes some work, it shapes you, it changes you, it corrects the cave, as the poet is saying. This is just my interpretation of the poem. I like the use of the word graceful in the last line of the poem. There's certainly lots of words in the poem that describe motion, but situated with the word error, I think it could also be interpreted as full of grace. As Christians, we know that we are afforded grace with our errors. And as I thought more and more about this word, I went back to the beginning of that sentence, which is a couple of lines above. Do you see it? It's the word save. Save and a graceful error. Save and grace. Saved by grace? Is the poet really embedding this idea in the poem? I think the poet might say it's up to the reader to decide. Well, at the time, the only poem by Richard Wilbur that I was familiar with was a poem called Boy at the Window. And I remembered reading it in a freshman English class at Erskine. And I don't remember anything that was said about an analysis of the poem, but I do remember one of my classmates asking our professor what the word bitumen meant. And Rachel Helton and I have looked up this word, and we've seen more than one pronunciation: bitumen, bitumen. Yesterday, after the performance, I talked about this yesterday, and a good friend of mine said, it almost sounds like bit human, a bit human. And I really like that sort of take on it, that nuance to it as well. So my professor told us that the word just means like coal. So this is a snowman with two eyes made out of coal. I'm going to assume two eyes so I can use my Frosty the Snowman reference. I think there are biblical themes in this poem as well. And I don't just mean the reference to Adam being cast out of paradise. I think the poet is addressing questions of what does it mean that the Bible says that we are created in the image of God? And why do we resist communion with God? And do we share some of the same emotions like empathy or love? And what about fear? What are we to make of the last line of the poem? Well, I think the poet is raising some interesting questions, and it made me wonder if Richard Wilbur was a Christian. And the extent of my research in that was just to Google it, but I did, and I found out that he was. I found an interview with Richard Wilbur that someone conducted at a conference on Christianity in literature, where he said, "The desire to see the so-called spiritual in the ordinary is especially sanctioned by Christian thought and feeling." Although he was an acclaimed poet of the 20th century, I found out that he was sometimes criticized for his optimism. One critic remarked, Richard Wilbur has all the qualities of a great poet except vulgarity. In response to the criticism that he was a poet of praise and not complaint, he said, "I feel that the universe is full of glorious energy, that the energy tends to take pattern and shape, and that the ultimate character of things is comely and good. I am perfectly aware that I say this in the teeth of all sorts of contrary evidence, and that I must be basing it partly on temperament and partly on faith, but that's my attitude." When asked specifically about the biblical instruction to rejoice in the Lord, Wilbur said yes, that really resonated with him. Here's one final quote of Richard Wilbur. He said, "I think it is probably a strange thing to feel commanded to rejoice because we associate joy with spontaneity. But I do think of making a joyful noise as an obligation which it would be distressing to fail. I think that one thing poetry needs to be, whatever it is talking about, one thing it needs to be is celebratory." Well, I have enjoyed learning more about Richard Wilbur, and I hope maybe I have sparked your interest in him as well. I wrote the song Mind when I was as a visiting professor there at Cornell taking that composition class. Later, I wrote music to the poem Boy at the Window, and after I finished those first two, I really wanted a third song to go with the set, to make it a set, and something that was not as serious maybe as the first two. I found a collection of Richard Wilbur poems at a used bookstore, and I enjoyed looking through it and reading some of them. And when I saw the poem, A Fire Truck, I knew that had the potential to be a fun way to end the set. So I'm going to invite Rachel Helton now to the stage, and we're going to perform all three songs as a set, three songs based on poetry by Richard Wilbur. Thank you. Well, I want to thank Bethany Dawson and Rachel Helton again for their time and helping me with this music, and thank you all for your attendance this morning. I appreciate it.